I'm Big Don Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren. Today, we are going to be getting into the Mavericks 116-108 road loss to the Philadelphia 76ers. The Mavericks moved to 37-40 with only 5 games left, with every game more state changing, more dire, more just everything on the table for every game at this point. The Mavericks scored 5 minutes in the last 6 minutes and 22 seconds. 5 points, excuse me, not minutes. But otherwise, they just suffered a total, sort of offensive collapse in the latter, minutes of the game. And we've seen that throughout stretches all season. There were a lot of different post-game quotes coming from some of the Mavericks' better players, as well as role players, head coach, everything like that. This game has a lot of layers to it to get into, all of which are pretty bad. And nonetheless, we'll be getting into all of that. But before we do that, here is an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So getting into it, we had another explosive start for the Mavericks where they scored 37 in that first quarter, in large part due to their ability to shoot out of the 4-on-3 scenarios. And they just looked really prolific, kicking the ball around the arc and getting open shots. They had that same sort of movement in the fourth quarter, but it just didn't pan out for them, and they subsequently missed a lot of shots. We've seen this recipe more than one times this year, where the Mavericks will have a good first and second quarter just by virtue of their shooting, and then they can't put two halves together because their shooting sort of blows away when it matters most. What do you necessarily attribute this to, in your opinion?
I mean, look, like as the game goes on, you can't expect a team to, I guess, keep that same shooting intensity that they had the like previous half or whatever. I mean, like one game that comes to mind whenever you mention that is like the Lakers Christmas Day game. That was one where, in the first half it was really bad, and in the second half Mavericks started making some shots, and that was the turnaround of the game. But here, is clearly, and it has been for the last like 20, 30 games, where the Mavericks in the first half or first quarter are making, shots. They're making their 3-point line, or they're making their 3-point shots. And then in the fourth quarter or second half, it just falls apart. To me, I think I would most equate it to, I hate to put this question in again, but, yet again, like, this team is so, just depth, like driven, or like there's just zero depth on this team. Not that there's no depth, but, as a game wears on, like, I don't know, like if Tim Hardaway, for instance, like we know his shooting woes, like there's just so much different variety of guys. Like Tim Hardaway, you can't really expect him to, be lights out for 4 quarters in a row. Like he's just not that kind of guy. Yes, he has his games every once in a while where he's like that. But, and then same for Reggie Bullock. Like there's just guys like this. And then, same with the defense. Like it's easy to pick up on that, and it's easy to, adapt. And I mean, unlike the Mavericks do most times, like actual other teams who have somewhat of a defensive DNA actually make changes at halftime. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, just, perimeter defense. But it just sucks whenever, there's one quarter, and it's always the fourth quarter for the Mavericks, where the shooting just drops off a cliff. And it sticks out like a sore thumb. But, I think the big thing for this team in years past, and you can still see it at times, was live and die by the 3-point line. Again, you don't see that as much in this year, but still there's that DNA, there is that sort of backbone for this team. And whenever they don't have the 3-point shot falling, like that's whenever the offense gets really stagnant. We saw that in multiple fourth quarters now in the last 10 games. Of course, this Philly one, and I forget what game it was where they only had like 12 in the fourth quarter. It was fairly recent.
Yeah, it was one of their more recent games.
Yeah. But anyways, like it just leads to stagnation and, stagnant offense. I mean, it's not pretty to see, but like I said, whenever they are falling, you can score 40, you can score 37, like for this instance, in a single quarter. But outside of that, I just don't think it's something that, you can expect for 4 quarters.
Yeah, I would definitely second you on that. And just regarding the whole live and die by the three complex that this team sort of suffers to, it's obviously something that Jason Kidd spoke about at the beginning of the season, saying that was something that they wouldn't be attuned to, but we've seen quite the opposite as the season has evolved, and the Mavericks' reliance on their role players, and just the sort of one dimensionality that persists there has sort of forced the issue that they are a live and die by the three team, and they don't really have much of a way to escape it just via their personnel. You have the two shot creating spearheads in Luka and Kyrie, and when people are trying to force the ball out of their hands, and you have a team like with multiple good wing defenders like the 76ers, then that's really going to force your hand to try and move the ball around the perimeter or move it to the middle of the floor and try to find open shooters in any capacity, because while one of those guys being on the floor with the other one does remediate a lot of the shot creation woes and things of that nature, if you can still trap good, things of that nature, two people is not enough to slow down the whole brigade. They can still force the Mavericks to play their game to an extent. And I think that that's been a lot of their woes, as well as just, when we talk about their fourth quarter shooting woes, things tend to get a little bit more nerve wracking in the fourth quarter. And I just think that we've seen too much of a sample size to think that the Mavericks have that clutch DNA, for lack of a better term. They just have choked like too many time after time. Like, I don't know what else to say. And I'd like to say that, we can attribute this to negative regression, or, this just because they shot good in the first half, but there's been too many times where they've shot good the whole game, at 77 games through rather at this stage. And they just can't make a bucket come when it matters most. And, with Luka and Kyrie, we've seen it with them a little bit as well since they've been here, but we've also seen positives. But overall, I think just team wide, it's been pretty negative from that aspect.
Yeah.
What did you make out to be the game, Jaren? Barring just that sort of really that lullaby of a fourth quarter where the Mavericks lulled you to sleep with their offense that took up the whole shot clock and just basically made you want to turn your TV off. Barring that, what did you take from the Mavericks from the first 3 quarters of the game?
I mean, honestly, like I think that this probably coexists with every Mavs fan that watched the game. I think that honestly they played really well through three quarters, that is. I mean, defensively in that first quarter, I think that there was some questions just regarding the start. There's too many easy inside baskets, but we see that this team have the tendency to do that, or allow that, I should say. But yeah, offensively, I don't really think that there's much you should question. I think, whenever the offense is clicking, as we mentioned, with the 3-point shooting, everything looks perfect. Everything looks fine and dandy. But the second, the wrench is, bogged in, there's a lid over the hole, or there's a lid over the basket. It's just whenever, like I said, it sticks out like a sore thumb. But yeah, through 3 quarters, I think that there's a lot of positives you can take away. Again, nothing that I don't think we don't know at this stage in the season. Barring, I guess, some positive JaVale McGee minutes there for a second, I don't really think that there's anything out of the norm.
I mean, I think that the offensive process was very reminiscent of what it's been ever since Kyrie's got here. I thought him and Luka coexist fairly well in terms of the splittage of their reps. They were running they're trying to use Luka out of the post a little bit more. I think that's a wrinkle that they've been exploiting a little bit more recently. Barring that, we didn't really see anything from a rotational perspective that wowed me. The Mavericks deferred to, running Kyrie off a lot of staggers and rescreens. And then, Luka, they've been sprinkling in some, direct pick and pops or flare screens with one of Luka and Kyrie at the same time, which is, started to open things up for them. But like we say, I mean, they just simply, no matter what the play is or what kind of schematics you instill, this team just doesn't have enough dynamism from people outside of Luka and Kyrie offensively within that starting lineup. And, better yet, within, even if you tap into that bench, maybe barring Tim Hardaway Jr. when he's really getting it going, or Christian Wood when he's getting it going, to remediate the issues of their one-dimensionality that continually persists within this team. I don't know regarding Christian Wood. It just seems it's hit or miss with him essentially, and hit or miss with his minutes at this stage in the year. Is there anything that you wanted to speak to regarding his recent stretch? Because it seemed as if he was going to start clocking more minutes there for a while, and he hasn't as of recently. I mean, he's kind of been up and down in that category. So what do you think about him and his role on the team at the moment, and the Mavericks center position as a whole as of recently?
I mean, Maxey, I believe this was his first game back from injury. I want to say he missed 2 games previously. But outside of that, I do know that there's pretty much a full healthy roster at this point. So to honestly answer that question, he only clocked 12 minutes in this one, and I believe he only clocked 17 minutes in the Pacers one. Because it did seem like he was clocking in the high 20s, or at least mid 20s at the very least, there for probably a week or two stretch. Now, I think that this team, they see the, I guess, inability on defense, which, of course, there's going to be defensive woes. But as of recently, like, we've seen the offense be more stagnant at times than the defense. I think that's saying a lot, because the defense has been pretty atrocious there for a while. But
at least seems like there's been, I guess, really over the last 2-3 games.
Yeah,
Ever since those Hornets losses, I think that there's been more of a concerted defensive effort from the team.
Exactly.
I don't think that it's remediated all their issues by any means. I mean, they still suffer from lack of personnel in that department, but it has been a nice influx of effort that has admittedly led to some, led to a little bit more stops. Has led them to get more turnovers. Now, conversely, I think it's been hurting them on the glass even more so, because they simply just don't have the length or the wherewithal to compete for some of these rebounds. And when they defend so hard, and there's a long miss, they're just kind of hard pressed to be able to get in position to get an offensive rebound, because they're in such scramble mode all the time with the amount of effort that they have to, overtly put in on defense to compensate for their lack of size and their lack of foot speed, things of that nature. But nonetheless, it's still been nice for them to, have at least tried harder on that end. But the center position as a whole, I mean, I think that it can also be tied into that, because, you see a guy in JaVale who kind of just looked as if he put on the try hard suit all of a sudden at game 77 of the season. I mean, earlier in the season, it just kind of seemed like he was just out there to be out there. I don't want to call this a resurgence of sorts, because it's so deep into the season, but he has looked like a guy who is able to, really guard up defensively, especially against some of these, bigger 7-footers, and he's moving his feet a lot better. This is, of course, in limited minutes, and we didn't see a whole lot of direct action on Embiid and things of that nature. But what do you think of the Mavericks center rotation as they approach the playoffs here? If they make the playoffs / play in, we don't know if they will or not. But do you think that there's any sort of wrinkles that they can go to? And do you think that this is fool's gold with JaVale, or do you think this is a real sort of resurgence with him, and him as an old, wily veteran, just trying to crank the intensity up right before the playoffs because he was saving his energy?
There's definitely some questions, I feel like now. We've never seen JaVale play, at least to this intensity, for 2 games in a row. So to see him have that sort of, quote unquote resurgence, or whatever you want to call it, in the lineup is honestly pretty cool, and it's a sight for sore eyes, honestly. But I think that, it definitely does bar some questions. The center rotation, I think, was something that was never really in question once we figured out the starting lineup with Dwight Powell. It was always something that, you could look forward to. If you needed offense, you plug in Christian Wood. Whenever Maxey was healthy, if you needed defense, you have Maxey right there. Now with JaVale McGee, it's like,
I mean,
his minutes.
I wouldn't say that it wasn't in question. Maybe not
No,
for
it wasn't
Jason
in question.
Kidd.
Like there was a
Well, no, like I feel like it was in question rather, but what I was trying to allude to is that maybe it wasn't in question for Jason Kidd, but for us, I do feel as if and a lot of Mavs fans, the center
on the court, it wasn't in
Yeah.
question because you got what you got. But yeah, from an outside perspective, it definitely was in question because you can't have a center lineup of Dwight Powell, Christian Wood, and Maxi Kleber and expect to make a deep playoff run with that. You just can't have it. That's just not possible. But I guess we made it possible last year. I won't lie. But so like I don't know. I think adding JaVale or at least making him somewhat feasible in a rotation definitely adds some questions. He's not the most athletic, or he's honestly pretty athletic, but he's not the cure all. He's not the band-aid for whatever problems that this center rotation has had. He's not going to do that, but he at least adds some depth and some rim protecting. I know he had that one insane block on James Harden that they ended up calling goaltending. I think that was a pretty clean block myself.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, but he adds that sort of perspective that this team just doesn't simply have, and they haven't had for this whole season. So adding that alone, I think can bring some sort of intensity or some sort of heart to this team that they just don't have. So I think it definitely like I said, raises questions, raises some eyebrows about what you can do with that rotation headed into the play-in or playoffs, whatever this team ends up doing. I mean, like I said, I think that that's probably the best thing. Because I mean, Jason Kidd, Jesus, he apparently has everything figured out come playoff time, but it doesn't look like we're gonna make playoffs. So I think adding some sort of question here and there is honestly a good thing for the big old Brewster Jason Kidd. It'll brew up some questions for him, so he'll actually get some free thinking. And maybe question what he's doing in his coaching rotation, which might not be the worst thing. So that's what I was gonna say. So.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what to attribute to JaVale's resurgence. We've seen these little pseudo resurgences from him at one point or another throughout the season, and we're also, like I said, don't try to be, don't take this verbatim. Take it as, potential fool's gold. I would view JaVale in the lens as a pseudo rim protector because at the end of the day, he can do a decent job. He's athletic, he's strong. But he's a little slow to react, comparable to some of the better rim protectors in the NBA. And he's also getting up there in age. So, his shelf life in terms of his minutes is going to be 10 to 15 of, actual solid minutes at most. So just tread carefully on that train. But his resurgence has definitely been welcomed. It's helped remediate a little bit of the rim protection problems the Mavericks have. Definitely not them in their entirety, nor has he helped the rebound problems in their entirety. But has he aided to them 5%? Yes. So that much is good. Otherwise, we kind of continue to see Jason Kidd toy with the back half of the rotation in this one, but there are no major adjustments. We're still getting a fresh dosage of Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell, Tim Hardaway Jr., just the main staples in the Mavericks rotation off the bench or, starting or in that, could be starting, could be bench territory. Josh Green, of course, he's been relegated to playing more off the bench, and that's not necessarily something I'm really pressed about because of his sort of up and down skittish play as of recently. I would maybe like to see them divert more to some Bertans and Morris minutes. Justin Holiday had been very bad offensively before this little stretch, so I can't really fault Kidd for not playing him. But I mean, his defense was invaluable. So, but Frank was out last game, so maybe he'll come back because he had a few decent games as of recent. He had actually been serviceable, running some pick and rolls. I mean, he wasn't this offensive, grace saver by any means, but he was coming in and he was being a lot less one-dimensionality, looked a lot more comfortable than he had at previous stretches throughout his tenure here. So he had looked decent defensively as of recent as well. So, I mean, there's some things they can do to toy, with the back half of the roster to like truly maximize what they're getting out of this team. But at the end of the day, I mean, even if you, and I've said this time in and time out again, even if you insert Christian Wood and play him properly in the starting lineup with Maxey and, or JaVale, or, even if you maximize the starting five, this team's personnel issues simply go beyond that. And they're, because of that, they're still suffering at this point in the season. I mean, maybe the Mavericks have like marginally, a few more wins, maybe 2 or 3 more wins. Yet, heck, they could be in the play-in race. And I mean, sometimes that's all it takes, man. So that, I guess that's why it stings a little bit more, but I don't know how much more rotation or coaching adjustments. And this is not me trying to shed Jason Kidd a blame. I just think that the personnel issues on this team are so bad that I just don't know what other coaching or rotational adjustments really could have been done throughout this season to actually significantly have affected this team's positioning in the standings, just because of their personnel issues. I mean, sure, you may be able to, marginally, swing the tide by a few games, I'm sure. But even if Kidd had the perfect rotations dialed in, this team has just been suffering throughout their perimeter defensive woes as well as their interior defensive woes and their one dimensionality on offense too heavily this season. I was curious to see where your opinion is on that matter, Jaren.
I mean, I feel like we've been talking about the same matter or the same topic for, probably since the beginning of the season. This team's depth, this team's lack of personnel has come to bite them in the ass over, I mean, what the Mavericks have been, I think now in 51 clutch games. I'm not sure how many of those they've won, but it's probably a lower percentage than they've lost. That's all I'm going to say. So I think that, yes, the personnel is probably a direct issue. I don't know if this is, it starts up top. It starts with the team building, general manager, where they started, how they wanted this roster to look. And, clearly it's not either what they wanted or it's not, how it's supposed to be. I do think that this is an unfinished roster, but if you look, at next season and the offseason, this free agency class, even who's really available for trading, or like, there's just really nobody that can, really move the needle that much. So I don't really know exactly where this team is.
I mean, I would maybe push back on that.
Okay, like if a Miles Turner,
because we don't necessarily know exactly what situations will evolve in the coming weeks or months. But I mean, yes, it does look fairly bleak on the market right now. But obviously there's the whole tie-in with the draft pick and everything. We vowed to our fans and stuff to not talk about the tanking or any of those agendas that sort of inherently come up with the nature of where the Mavericks are at in the standings. Where are they currently? A game and a half out of the play-in, Jaren?
I believe they're a full game, but I think Oklahoma City plays tomorrow. So
yeah, so the Mavericks are a full game, give or take, out of the play-in right now with 5 games left in the regular season. We are still in the A train. We are still pushing for them to make the playoffs. I can very much clearly acknowledge that the most favorable outcome for this team would be if they did not make the playoffs and they were able to retain their top 10 pick in terms of a team building perspective. Especially if Kyrie's going to stay. Given, some of these quotes recently, that definitely seems a lot more, the confidence meter there is a little more higher, but you still can never be sure. But, putting that aside, that doesn't mean that I want them to tank. I still want them with Kyrie and Luka to be successful and go as far as they can in the playoffs. That's the agenda that we want to be pushed. But I mean, I can acknowledge, yes, there could potentially be other ulterior better outcomes if those situations presented itself, but we'll just have to see how these last 5 games unfold. I mean, we've said this for the last 2 weeks. Every game is the most important game of the season at this point, and every game has huge stakes that could potentially, throw you in or throw you out of the play-in, just given how logjam that Western Conference playoff race is. So it's just a wait and see thing. I mean, I may sound monotone at this stage because I have to talk about this team's problems and the exact same problems every time that I get on this podcast. But I mean, I'm still holding, biting my fingernails and sitting at the edge of my chair as much as anybody at this stage in the year. So, it is what it is, and we just have to wait and see how things turn out. If you have anything else that you want to add upon this game or any, schematic things, we can dip into how we thought all the guys fared last night, from the 76ers and the Mavericks perspective.
I mean, real quick, I just want to touch up on this. I think that this was the first time this season that I've gotten sad. It's not anger, it's sad. It's to that point where, you only have a guaranteed 5 more games of Mavericks basketball. And, there's no guarantee that those games are going to be pretty to watch. So it was a little more of a somber into the fourth quarter. I don't know how you feel about that, but it was just one of those things where you just kind of look up at the TV and you're like, you just say, damn, that's all you can say. You just say, damn. It didn't feel too good, but I mean, regarding the who played, or I guess how guys some played, I guess one guy that really stuck out to me, I don't mention his name a lot, but Tim Hardaway, I thought he played amazing in 36 minutes. I mean, he shot 50% from the 3-point line and had 21 points. In the fourth quarter, he kind of seemed like he was like the only guy keeping the Mavericks afloat. Props to him for that. I think him and Josh Green were kind of the sort of energy type guys that were needed at that time in the game. And they did exactly that. And, Tim Hardaway had his usual Tim Hardaway shots, nothing, too out of the norm, but they actually landed. I do know that he missed quite a bit of corner shots and had a few of those hit. Maybe there'd be a different outcome, but, we see the scoreboard now, and, he's still, I thought, put up a hell of a game. I don't know if you want to touch up on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I've liked the actions that they've been using him in recently, especially ever since the Kyrie trade. They've been running these like stagger curl offs for him, but then sometimes, like they'll run like a stagger for Kyrie, and then they'll have both of the guys screening will then screen the other way, and it ends up being this sort of fake where Tim comes off of a curl off for the top of the 3 key. And there's been some different offensive just schematics that they've been using to get him open recently. And he's really been knocking down his shots at a high volume recently. I thought he's been playing great ever since he's come back from his injury. I still saw some rotational mishaps defensively last night for sure, and him being out of place, especially off ball. But on ball, he wasn't honestly that terrible, as he's, continued to be decent from that perspective as of recently. So, I thought, he was one of the better players last night. Let's just go ahead and knock out the 2 stars. What did you think of Kyrie and Luka's game last night?
Yeah, I mean, Kyrie, he kind of had a little resurgence in the Indiana game. I mean, he didn't, score all too much, but he didn't really have to. In this one, I just think that he was, at times I felt like he was trying to take over a little too much, but that's just Kyrie being Kyrie. I mean,
really?
That's exactly not that he was taking over. I just think that, there was some passes that he could have made, maybe not smarter shots, because it would have been more of a 3-point look. But I don't know. I think the buckets that he did get were really tough buckets. He did have a 23 points, which I think is a high for him since like beginning of or before the Charlotte games. But yeah, I still feel like he had an amazing game compared to what we've seen over the last week. So I'm not there's no gripes there, other than I think that he could have made some more passes. But outside of that, I think that's really the only harp that I can make. Even defensively, I thought he was playing really good.
Yeah, and then Indiana game. I mean, I'm sure you allude to this during the podcast, but that was probably like his best defensive game as a Maverick.
Yeah, I think he had I think it was him who had like 2 blocks and 3 steals or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, conversely, rather though, I would reckon that he could have been more aggressive at times. I thought that there were multiple opportunities where he could have attacked off closeouts, or he made the extra pass maybe when he shouldn't have. I thought that the Mavericks were really unselfish last night, but I also do think that it played to their downfall on multiple occasions where guys just passed up open shots, more so role players than anything. But Kyrie, as I've said, anytime that Luka's in the game, he acts as a great ball mover when he's having to, take heed and, be the primary creator and things of that nature. He's been pretty excellent in the pick and roll in those scenarios so far. He obviously doesn't have the size to make some of those crazy passes that Luka does, but I mean, he's been surprising to me with just how savvy he is in terms of being able to pass. I mean, he had that nice lob to Tim in transition the other night. So I thought he did good from that perspective. I do also, though, agree that he did take some tougher shots where he could have probably moved the ball a little bit better, to your point. But I do think at large, he honestly he passed up a few open looks. But I thought that the rep splits with Luka looked good. I think that they looked very seamless offensively together. I liked how it's hard for both of them, rather, when the whole 76ers defense is made to funnel guys towards Embiid, as particularly primary ball handlers and things of that nature. I thought Luka did a good job trying to like manipulate and snake pick and rolls, and they used a few Gortat screens to try and throw Embiid off his tracks in certain scenarios, but it was still like a rough process. The 76ers are really good at hedging and recover. They have good scramble defense, and when the Mavericks weren't able to create a 4-on-3 scenario, or they weren't able to beat the trap, things did get rough at times for both of those guys. They had a few lackadaisical turnovers in the second half, but I mean, Luka was making his 3-pointer. He was, there were a few times where he maybe could have got to the rim a little bit better, but he played. He went in there and battled, and it's a tough ass, guy to really, just ask for him to go in there and try and, get to the rim every play and finish over Embiid. But I mean, I think Luka could have maybe done a little bit better job of just, manipulating some of the passing lanes. He looked fairly predictable last night. I would have liked to see him attack a little bit more to open those things up for him, but he was still shooting the ball at a high clip, and I think Embiid just got his number, as we could see there at the end of the game. It's the thumbnail of this podcast of Joel Embiid, obviously blocking Luka in the waning moments of the game to essentially seal the game. So, that was just an MVP type play right there. But yeah, it is what it is, man. But I still think Kyrie and Luka, it wasn't a God moment from them, from either of them for that matter. And it was not their best games in Maverick uniforms. But I do think in a game where the Mavericks were hard pressed to find offense, maybe barring their fourth quarter shot diet, which I think should have been more. They only took 5 shots combined in the fourth quarter. I think they should have looked to, isolate and maybe defer to some mid-range shots in those moments. But barring that, throughout the course of the game, I don't really have too many gripes with how they played.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, especially with the Luka narrative. I think, yes, I think ultimately, I think he settled on a few threes and wasn't, as aggressive as I feel like he could have been. But I think that this is one of the more cleaner Luka games that we've seen in recent times. Nothing major, 24 points, but almost put up a triple double. So I just think from a team perspective, this is one of the better games that he's had in a while. But outside of that, I really don't think there's much to add in terms of like Dwight Powell. What do you want to talk about with Reggie?
I do think that there's actually some to add with Dwight Powell.
Really?
Rather, yeah.
Let's hear this.
Jeff Van Gundy said this during the broadcast, but per usual, anytime he's severely outmatched against like one of the better centers in the league, it's typically like the sort of albatross center that usually gets him like OKC Jalen Williams part 2, or like Poku, or Mo Bamba. Those are the guys that are really going to give Dwight Powell issues time in, time out again. But we see the stark contrast in terms of the balls to the wall effort for these national, TV games where he has to get up versus an Embiid. He tried his ass off defensively, and he played about as good of pick and roll coverage, I thought, as he was physically capable of doing so. Okay. Now I say that, with the prerequisite that there are lots of guys that could have played better defense on Embiid than Dwight Powell did last night. And, nobody can stop Embiid, but there are lots of guys who could have played better defense. But, he was constantly in position, doing as much as he could, trying to contest. And I appreciated that much. He did kind of get up. For a guy that has this sort of aura of being just so, hustle and balls to the wall all the time, it's interesting to see some of that, defensive fall off versus lesser opponents. But, I do think he tried really hard. It was hard to get things going as a drop coverage center and Embiid, that he can basically just throw anything in terms of that Powell Luka pick and roll to the wayside, because that's just not going to fly with him back there. But Dwight almost got a lob on him, but he missed it and he went to the free throw line, I believe. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, he just did a good job probing in the dunker spot and trying as hard as he could on defense. I'm not going to say playing defense, but trying on defense.
Yeah, so I did fail to forget, or I forgot Dwight Powell's heroics on the defensive side of things. He did honestly put up a pretty good first half in terms of, at least sticking side by side with Joel Embiid. I believe Embiid only had like maybe 11 at the half or something comparable to that. But yeah, I mean, I do concur with what you said. Dwight Powell honestly had one of his better defensive efforts in terms of this season. I do concur with what you said by there. I guess lastly, in terms of starters, we'll cover Reggie Bullock. I know that he's gotten some flack on Twitter a little bit. A pretty bad shooting night, or honestly, a really bad shooting night. And even defensively, his kind of defense was a little bit in question there. I guess, is there anything that you really wanted to cover? Any answers that you wanted to I guess fully answer, because I do know that his name was in question as, why was he out there in clutch time? The common things whenever it comes to a bad Reggie Bullock game.
I mean, I don't necessarily think it was a bad Reggie Bullock game. I think it was a very average Reggie Bullock game. What did he see what he ended up shooting last night? He shot
like 3 for 10.
Yeah, he shot 3 of 10. He just struggled from 3. I mean, yeah, he was just having a bad shooting game, simply as is. He was still playing decent point of attack defense. That Harden Embiid pick and roll is about as dynamic as they come in terms of their ability to just manipulate the defense and make you react to what they're doing. So I thought he did a decent job at the point of attack on that. He did a decent job when he was task guarding Maxey. It wasn't elite defense by any standards. I mean, he wasn't out here being some sort of gaudy defensive player where he was like an Anunoby type where he's essentially, shutting you down and getting the steal every play. But he was playing good, solid defense as he, usually does. There were a few times where, he got blown by, but he's typically, as he is, even at his age, always in position. He's good on his rotations, off ball defense, things of that nature. Intentionally, he'll just get caught lacking because of the lack of athleticism. He had a bad shooting night and it was very ill timed. And that sort of is what it is, but he's been playing decent recently. So I'm not as attuned to some of those Twitter takes, I guess, as others, but yeah, I mean, he didn't have the best of game shooting wise. I'm not going to negate that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll double up on what you said. It wasn't the best Reggie Bullock game, but it wasn't a bad Reggie Bullock game. I would call it, average to mediocre. I do think that on a defensive side of things, I do believe that he honestly had a pretty solid game. Just in the way, especially in the fourth quarter, I feel like he controlled James Harden, or I guess throughout the game, he controlled James Harden and Tyrese Maxey for that matter. For majority of it, yes, he did get blown by a few times, and he had some timely calls that I think
There's a lot of weird referee antics in that.
Yeah, there's some calls there. I think late in game that first off either shouldn't have been called or were called really late. It was just some weird like final 5 minutes in terms of reffing. So I'm not going to take anything away from that. I do think that Reggie, in terms of that, he did fall off a little bit in the fourth quarter, but even still, I felt like he was, at times it felt like he was the only defender on the floor. So I'm not going to take too much away, or I'm not going to take too much negatives away from his game. It simply, as you put it, it was just a bad shooting night. And it came timely because this was a must win at the end of the day, and it was on on national TV. But outside of that, I don't think that there should be any calling for his name or any, backlash or anything like that, because there's always a scapegoat whenever it comes to Mavericks media, and he happened to be it. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take too much away from that. I did feel like he played a good defensive game. Headed to the bench, I guess we'll cover Maxi Kleber. He was the lone, well, I guess someone else, Josh Green clocked 20 minutes, but he clocked the most minutes with 26 off the bench. I guess, how did you feel about his game? I don't know.
I still am on the train of that, there should be continued influx of Wood and Kleber lineups, off the bench, or if they're starting together, whatever which way. But, it seems like that's not really something that's where my wish is going to be appeased at this point in the season. I mean, I thought he played, decent defense when he had to get switched on to guys. He Honestly, I thought Powell even at times maybe played better defense on Embiid, but I mean, it's just an impossible guard to really even fathom in terms of some of those pick and roll coverages. But yeah, I mean, barring that, he had some weird plays where he like traveled or just didn't look ready to shoot. I would just like to see him be a little bit more confident. You know, he's been a guy that's had confidence woes before in the past. I know he's dealing a lot with his, through a lot with his injury right now, but he had 3 turnovers tonight. A lot of those were just, in virtue of not knowing exactly where to go with the ball. So I would like him just to see him be a little bit more confident. But barring that, I mean, he played decent defense. It's a tough ask, out of anybody to guard Embiid, and he made a 3. So that's really the only call I have for him at the moment. Christian Wood, while he was in there, he acted as the lone big man a majority of the time, even though he, in a very brisk 12 minutes. He stretched the floor a little bit. He pushed the ball in transition. That's kind of how he got his 9 points, got to the free throw line a couple times. Was getting some boards, but, again, just not enough size there to really be comparable to beat Embiid in any sort of fashion. And that just hurt the Mavericks desperately. I thought that the Mavericks in those 6 JaVale McGee minutes, like, honestly looked the best. I would have liked to at least see him get like maybe 10 to 15, just the way he was playing in this game. I'm not talking about his season at large. I'm just talking about this sort of pseudo resurgence that we're getting from him. But I mean, he didn't get any blocks or anything, but he went there and clogged the paint, and he didn't play in the Embiid minutes. He was primarily going up against guys like Paul Reed, things of that nature. So, I mean, but you could see that his impact on the game was immediate. And I mean, maybe the Mavericks do need him to play more, but I know they're desperate for answers at this point in the season. But like I said, just tread carefully in that direction, because we've seen a whole lot of bad from JaVale barring just these last 2 games. And but yeah, and then he scored, I think, once in the pick and roll. So yeah, that's as far as those guys go. In terms of the few young bucks, I was gonna kind of let you have the floor with Josh Green and Jaden Hardy. What do you think of how they played last night?
Yeah, I think Josh Green yet again had another, timid offensive game, one where should have taken a few more shots or should have closed out or should have been more aggressive on some closeouts. Just the usual gripes with him over the last like 2 to 3 weeks. Even still, I didn't feel like he had the most amazing or the worst game offensively. I think that there's, in terms of a rebounding perspective, I think he had a really good game. He kept some possessions alive that definitely should not have been.
His energy is always ever prevalent, regardless of how he's feeling offensively. But yeah, it is a stark contrast to your point. Really, just throughout these last 10 to 15 games versus before the All-Star break, it just looks like a totally different player at times.
Yeah, it does.
His ability to get to the rim and take guys off the dribble. It just seems as if that's an asset that seemingly left him. And I don't think it's something that left him entirely, but I do think that he's having some confidence bouts right now. And it definitely increases the one dimensionality of this team when he's not able to do things like that. And we're starting to see that as we really come down the stretch here. That I think that it's actually been a very underlying aspect of things that's hurt this team within recent games that I don't think much people at all are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to be honest. I think you said that perfectly. So even from a defensive perspective, I feel like he's been a little less aggressive. It just that controlled aggression. I think that he's lost. He's been too aggressive, I guess you can say. So I guess pretend like you didn't hear that. His controlled aggression has honestly, kind of disappeared at times. I didn't feel like we really saw that. I mean, it does play into some effect, having an over aggressive player, especially on the offensive side, as I mentioned with the offensive rebounding. But from the defensive side, he didn't have a high foul game or anything like that, but he just had some bad closeouts. Either was nowhere to be found or was over aggressive, and it caused for some easy drives inside. And for that alone, I think that he honestly had a pretty bad defensive game, which you don't really hear a lot of. At the very least, that's his one safe spot.
We're hearing a lot more average defensive games from him recently. He just
and I don't know. It's just, especially off the bench, like you look, who's a defense aside from Maxey, like there's really zero defense off the bench. So to have him coming off the bench and basically provide, at best average over this last over this last week of stretch and, games and whatever, it's honestly, as you said, and I think you said it perfectly, it's hurt this team over the last 10 to 15 games. I guess lastly, we'll cover Jaden Hardy. I think that this guy, or I guess Hardy, I think that this is the first time in a while we've seen him hit a rookie wall. Just kind of went up on
I
some
mean,
shots that he
I'd say
definitely
that's
should have.
drastic. I mean, he didn't have the best
Well,
shooting game, but go
compared
ahead.
to what we've seen, it was a quote unquote
Yeah,
rookie. I think that there are some drives that he took inside where, either could have pulled up for a mid range, taken some smarter shots, or just passed out.
yeah,
But yeah, I do think, going to the rim at times or going to the glass at times, being sort of more aggressive definitely hurt him. And I think it was just, I don't know how many, I think it was one time he was blocked, but it was kind of
in
cringe.
transition. Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, in transition. That's what exactly what it was. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, I do think that he just had a little bit of a negative shooting game. Still finished with 50% from the 3-point line and 8 points in this game. And 4 assists. I think that's an underrated stat that he's honestly provided over the last few weeks. But yeah, I don't think anything major out of him. I'm not going to take away much, but
yeah,
he clocked in 18 minutes,
yeah,
and for a while in that first half, it looked like he was getting a
yeah.
legit role up until he kind of hit a quote unquote rookie wall. But
Mhm.
he didn't look bad. I just don't think he looked as great as he has over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, his evolution as a tertiary ball handler has been something that's really affected this team in a positive aspect over the last like week or two. And may not be attributed to wins and things of that nature, just given some of the other issues that persist on this team. But he's been a beacon of hope in a very, very dark palace. But yeah, I mean, Jaden Hardy, he's been playing great recently. I mean, just from his catch and shoot numbers to his ability to take guys off the dribble, and even like you said, Jaren, run those pick and rolls. We're seeing his ability to find the weak side shooter in a pick and roll versus earlier when he would just try to force a layup. We're starting to see him sift through some of those intricacies from an offensive side of things, and that's really something that you look for from a developmental side, from a mental side as a rookie coming into this league. But we're seeing him evolve, in front of our very own eyes. I expect him to only get better and better, and especially as like come next season, like I think that we could easily pencil him in as like the distinguished backup point guard for the Mavericks. I don't necessarily know how all
Whoa,
that's
hey,
going
don't
to go.
say that. Don't say that yet. We thought the Mavericks would be a 3 seed this year, so don't say that yet.
Well, I mean that's not necessarily like
Well, okay,
saying that
no,
they're
I
going to
know,
be
but
good. Like that's just
I know. I would pencil him in as a rotational piece, whether off the bench. I don't think he's gonna be a starter anytime soon, but I do
yeah,
think off the bench
yeah.
for
No, but I
next
mean
year, I
he's
think
like one of the only guys like when he's on, and of course, and I'm not negating. And I'm on the Hardy hype train, but I'm not on the Hardy stupid train. I do think that there are there are obviously still a lot of woes that he suffers from. He's not totally figured it out offensively, and you can attribute like some of the things he did tonight were just some of that preemptive basketball that he starts to play, where he starts predicting things that do not end up coming into fruition, whether being getting to the rim or shooting shooting a shot when a guy goes over on a screen, things like that. There's still a lot of holes that he's going to need to patch, but I mean he's going to be a cog in this rotation, hopefully for years to come. If that ends up coming into fruition, who knows if it does. The Mavericks have already lost one star point guard that they drafted in the second round, early in the second round. I'm not necessarily saying Hardy's going to be a star, but they do have a track record of screwing things of that nature up. So, but we will see. But nonetheless, I thought, yeah, he suffered a little bit of, and I just want to preface everybody to keep the expectations low. I mean, he's been playing well recently, and he deserves, like I said, at least 10 to 20 minutes in the rotation. But don't be fooled by some of these bigger point nights from him, because he can, still get after it really hard at times when he's just not able to get to the rim, or he's hitting a rookie wall, things of that nature. So that's all I would say with that. But I think he did play pretty decent.
Yeah, no, I definitely tend to agree with everything you said. I mean, outside of that, just from I guess a whole game, or at least reverting back to the game, I think it's more of what we've seen or what we become accustomed to seeing. Either 3 really good quarters and a collapse in the fourth, or just nothing to begin with. But definitely, a little bit more of a somber, sad sort of approach or sort of podcast. I don't think we've had very many of these But yeah, I
you want
mean,
to talk about any of the 76ers before we
yeah,
wrap
we
this
can
up?
mention some 76ers. I thought Embiid, yeah, his block on Luka was MVP-esque, but is there anybody Paul Reed? I didn't know that he clocked that many minutes for
I
them.
mean, yeah, I thought everybody had their sort of stereotypical performances.
Yeah.
Like Embiid, he played. I mean, it wasn't the most insane, prolific stat sheet from him, but I mean, he played like an MVP. He got a little bit of foul trouble, but I mean, you still saw his dominance on the game really come threefold there. I thought Tyrese Maxey, he got out in transition really well, was doing it, making the Mavericks pay anytime they went under on screens. When he's shooting the ball, they're a really hard team to stop. Harden had a rough game shooting the ball, but I mean, he's been a great ball mover and pick and roll facilitator for them. So he continues to serve a role at this stage in his career. PJ Tucker didn't do much. He's kind of just out there playing defense, and he did shoot a floater tonight though, Jaren.
He did.
Didn't,
He did.
it wasn't just that one corner three. He did go in there and shoot a floater.
I will admit, early in the game, I was picking one Sixers player to end the Mavericks season, and I picked Georges Niang, and he played pretty good.
Yes, he never disappoints. The self-proclaimed Iowa State fame. He came in there, man, and he was making everything in the pick and pop off screen.
He got chippy. He even got in it.
Yeah, no, he was getting at the Mavericks. But that was to be expected. D'Anthony Melton, I mean, he's almost comparable to as good as Maxey is, just because of the defensive impact he also holds him for that team. I mean, he just does a little bit of everything. Great game, man, from one of the better role players in our league, in my opinion. 33 minutes, 5 of 6 from 3. I mean, what else can you ask for? Great point of attack defense on the other end. 6'5" point guard. Like, there's just Paul Reed. He came in, filled a cog as a really good rebounder. Had some impressive effort plays there, but didn't really do a whole lot of everything. Jalen McDaniels, brother of Minnesota Timberwolves forward Jaden McDaniels, he played decent. He had a weird little stretch in the end of the third quarter where they, called the foul for him essentially. Was it Tim Hardaway Jr. that he just elbowed?
Yeah, and that's what started the fight with Georges Niang and everybody.
Oh yeah, and then they had that little scuffle and everything.
Yeah,
but it wasn't big or anything, hence why we didn't mention it earlier in the podcast. But he knocked down a corner three. He's wiry, plays some good defense, but he's not as a complete of an offensive player as his brother. And I think he's a little skinny, more wiry. He doesn't have that sort of bust potential or that boom potential on defense as his brother does, just due to he needs to add some size and things like that. But they're fairly comparable in terms of their play style, I would say. And I think he's a really good rotational player off the bench for them. But yeah, I mean, they had some guys that impressed last night, but I wouldn't say that the game was necessarily there for the taking, because they're a really good team. But the game was there for the taking for the Mavericks. The Sixers did suffer a lot of shooting woes, and they had a lot of negative regression from three, barring Melton and Niang. And, that kept the Mavericks in the game, and they simply did not take advantage of it. So that kind of is what it is. But as Jaren kind of said, it was more of a somber podcast, but that's just sort of the nature of things. It sucks, but we'll be back. Who are the Mavericks playing next year?
Saturday night, the Miami Heat.
Saturday night versus the Miami Heat. We will be back for that one as the Mavericks go to the AAA instead of the AAC, the American Airlines Arena.
No, it's not American. I don't even know what it is anymore. They've had like 5 different names this year.
Oh, it's not. That's wild.
It was FTX, and then that whole FTX.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah. So who even knows what they are at this point? But hopefully they win. We just need wins at this point in the season.
Yeah.
We're just praying, and otherwise, I'd be lying to you guys if I didn't think that this, we're obviously going to get more narrative based, as things are more clear and we know exactly what's going to happen. But morale is low over here at Mainstream Mavs, and needless to say, we're still, on the same boat as you guys in terms of thinking that the Mavericks are, if we had to guess right now, if I had to make a prediction, that the Mavericks probably will not make the playoffs or the play-in. I would probably attest to that and stand by that. If I had to make a prediction right now, this is going to be the YouTube question of the day right here. For any of you guys listening on YouTube, this is the YouTube question of the day. Will the Mavericks make the playoffs or the play-in? Comment down below. Jaren, what's your answer to that? If you had to predict, just one word.
One word. No, they will not.
All right, Jaren holds same opinion as me.
Their
Otherwise,
season will end in the Miami-Dade Arena.
this is gonna be the this is the penultimate loss for the right before they go on to lose like 3 or 4 more to end the season. But otherwise, you guys can catch us at Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and give us a review. You can review and say whatever you want in the review. If you like Jaren's new mustache, if you like my Jeffrey Dahmer-esque glasses, probably shouldn't have said that in the podcast, but I do get a lot of comments about that. So, if you like any of those things, you can definitely comment down below, or if you actually like our podcast, we would really appreciate that. Give us a rating down below, subscribe to us, follow us, turn on post noties, whatever you guys would like to do. Also make sure to, of course, like, comment, and subscribe if you are listening on YouTube. And if you guys have not already, make sure to follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs. But barring that, we will catch you in the next one after the Heat game. Mainstream Mavs signing out.
Bye-bye.